Sometimes your life can take an unexpected turn in the blink of an eye, and for these people, it did exactly that. The following stories are from people recounting their scariest memories and moments that have happened to them. Enjoy. I was home for the summer from college, and my mother and brother had just headed out for a few-day trip to visit colleges. This meant I was to take care of my father. Something was clearly wrong, but we couldn't tell what. He had Parkinson's, but it was more than that. But we figured I could handle it. This is when I came to realize something in his broken mind hated me with a passion. He wouldn't listen to anything I said. Now, I admit, I was pissed off, so I wasn't doing a terrific job, but even simple things like getting him food was an hour-long ordeal that ended with us shouting. This last time, I called Mom on the house phone because at least he'd listen to her. I gave him one phone and I was on the other, yelling at each other through it, even though we were 5 feet apart. Poor Mom, trying to referee from a few hundred miles away. Finally, Dad hangs up his phone and hands it to me. Oh, he's done, thank God, I think. But then he tries to take the still active phone from my hand, which I refuse. And that's when it happens. A change came over him. It was subtle, but he stood slightly straighter. It was like for a moment, someone else was in his body. He stared at me, and in the most calm, cold voice I have ever heard, "I'm going to kill you." There was no emotion behind it, no energy. He just said it as a fact. I was stunned. Mom heard it over the phone as I stood there, paralyzed. Her voice broke through in a whisper. "Kai, run!" I threw the phone at my dad, rounded the corner, and grabbed my keys. My car screamed out of the driveway. It was pure animal instinct for me at that point. I had to run, because if I had stayed there... Dad didn't really remember what happened. He was confused as to why I was suddenly gone. I have no idea what went on in his head at that moment, but I stared into something back there. I was working at a crematory/funeral home, and I just picked up the body of a girl my age from the county coroner's office and was going through the check-in procedure. This consisted of lots of paperwork, fingerprints, documentation of belongings, etc. Now, when a body comes to us from the coroner, it's typically an unexpected death that occurred under questionable circumstances. This particular one, I could tell simply by looking at her, was a drug overdose. She had very obvious injection sites in her arms, thigh, one on her foot, and what appeared to be needle marks all over her lower abdomen. Like, it looked like this chick went to fucking town, stabbing herself in the belly. This was strange to me, because I know it isn't a typical place to inject drugs. Especially because this girl was a bit on the heavy side. Nor is it usually a place where the pathologist will draw fluids in a case like this. Anyway, I shrugged it off and began to document her personal items, which come to us zipped up in the body bag in a black trash bag. Usually, the coroner's office provides a detailed list of belongings for liability reasons. This case came with no such list, so it surprised me to see that she did indeed have a property bag with her, tucked under a leg. I tore the bag open, and out flopped a fully developed, completely green, dead baby with a very smushed head. You can imagine my shock, opening the bag, expecting to find shoes, clothes, maybe a wallet, and instead a tiny human plopping out. Long story short, the family did not know, and telling them was horrifying in and of itself. There was absolutely no sort of documentation on this fully developed human, and the coroner was just as shocked as we were. Some jackass autopsy tech had just stuffed the baby in a bag in hopes of us not finding it and cremating it to save themselves some time on paperwork and dealing with an already distraught family. An autopsy was done on the baby. Family and friends were questioned, the whole 9 yards. Later, a friend of the deceased disclosed that she was the only one who the girl had told about being pregnant, and her plans to try and give herself a late-stage abortion by injecting heroin straight into her womb. Pretty fucked up. Needless to say, I was always hesitant when opening property bags in fear of finding another dead green infant as opposed to a pair of Nikes. When my friend's dad was around 17, he decided to go camping with about 8 or so of his friends. This took place in the Wisconsin forest. When they got to the site, they decided to split up to collect firewood in groups of 2 and meet back at the site in around 20 minutes. One group wasn't back right away, and since they were a couple, they just assumed they were fornicating in some bushes and cracked a couple jokes about it. After around an hour, they decided they should probably go look for them and headed off to search in the area they had been collecting wood. They saw, behind a bush, part of the girl's bloody shirt, and the man's shoes were lying scattered around the scene. They quickly rushed back to their car so they could drive to the park ranger's office, which was about 5 miles away, so they could report the incident. However, they found that their gas had been siphoned, so they had no choice but to walk. On their walk back to the office, they saw a semi pass by with one driver and 2 faces pressed up against the window, which they believe were their friends begging for help. The 2 friends were reported missing and have never been found to this day. This happened senior year of high school. My best friend and I were at her house, which was way up in one of the canyons, and she had a long, windy driveway. We had been there all day, and her mom had gone out. She and I were supposed to go meet a couple friends in Hollywood that night. Anyway, we had been goofing around all day and watching scary movies and whatnot. Started to get ready to go out. Her bathroom had one of those his-her double sink deals, so she was near one. I was at the other. All of a sudden, I got the creepiest feeling. All of the hair on my arms stood up, and I had this sudden feeling of panic. To this day, it is the most terrified I have ever been. I was putting on eyeliner when it happened, and I caught her eye in the mirror and said, "We need to leave, right now." I thought she would be like, "What? You're being ridiculous." But instead she said, "I know." My blood ran cold when she said it. We left so quickly that we just grabbed what was in front of us. We booked it out of her house and down the driveway, which we weren't supposed to do because her mother had just had it repaved and her car was parked down on the street. We rounded the curve in the driveway, and there was an SUV parked dead center in the middle of the street without its lights on. Suddenly, the lights turned on full blast, and the SUV blared its horn and took off. We scrambled the rest of the way down, totally ruining the new pavement. We were getting into her car and calling the police when her mom pulled up right behind us. To this day, I do not know if it was a robber, but the fact that she and I both got the same sense of dread at the exact same time creeps me out to no end. Quite a few years ago now, my mom went on a vacation with a friend of hers to Florida for a week and a half during the winter. So I was alone at home and took advantage of it by setting up my consoles on the big living room TV. One night it was snowing, and throughout the night I felt really uncomfortable. Granted, this was day 6 of 11, and I've never actually been alone in the house for that long before, so I just chalked it up to loneliness. The snow stopped sometime in the middle of the night. I went to sleep on the couch around 2 a.m. Next morning, plows came down the street and cleared them up as usual. I had left to pick up some stuff at the store down the street, but I stopped almost immediately when I got off the porch. There were footprints in the snow leading up to the large bay window on the side of the house, a set leading toward and away. The ones leading in were slightly filled from the snowfall. Then there were 2 footprints positioned right next to the far corner of the window, close to the rear porch, and some large bushes that were finely detailed and pointed toe toward the wall. Someone had been standing outside the window for a while, staring into my house, and didn't leave until the snow stopped. The tracks started and ended at the street, so where they came from and where they went afterwards were destroyed by the plows. I have since bought large tinted sheets to cover said window, hung thick, dark curtains, and rearranged furniture to cover the entire bottom third of the entire window length. Fuck that shit ever again. I'm a 31-year-old man, and the idea of someone just staring into my house through the windows gives me the kind of anxious horror I felt when I almost fell off a 15-foot cliff. I can't even sit by windows at night without fully closing curtains. This one is sort of a 2-in-1 bonus. The first part is mine. The next part is my mother's. Mine was looking into my rapist's eyes right before he attacked me. He had been a friend of mine before that, and I thought I knew him well. But in that moment, he just looked so eerily inhuman. His expression was this weird mix of completely blank and kind of manic. You know, in Jaws, there's a line about how the shark had doll's eyes. That's what it looked like, if that makes any sense. I can't describe how unnerving it is to look at someone and just know they intend to do you imminent harm. My mother's story is when she was probably 16. She was babysitting for one of her neighbors after dark one night in a quiet, suburban residential area in a small town. She heard a knock on the door, which came as a surprise because she hadn't expected the parents to be home that early. So she called out, "Who is it?" and got no response, but another knock. Confused, She went to the door and looked through the peephole, only to find that she couldn't see anyone there. But as she was looking, there was another knock, but it sounded low on the door. This house had an upstairs window that overlooked the front stoop, so she very carefully tiptoed up there, leaving the lights off, and looked down. And there was a strange man crouched down off to the side of the front door, waiting for her to open it. She said she called the police, but he took off before they could get there, probably thinking nobody was home. Before hearing this story, I had always wondered why my mom was so adamant about always checking to see who it was before you open the door. I was in Vegas with my brother. We both liked to party hard, still in our 20s, walking down the strip. I see two guys with backpacks on. I know what that means. I say, "Damn, wish we had some weed." They immediately turn around and offer us other things as well. We took down his number to get other things later in the night. Hours later, after tons and tons of booze and stuff, we call this guy up for more. When we met these two guys, they were on foot. The second time, though, we had to meet them in front of a hotel because they were driving. So he tells us to hop in for a few so we can get what we need without people watching. Now at this point, my brother and I are fucked up and don't realize what's happening until it starts to get dark. We had only been driving for 10 minutes, but we were obviously off the strip, away from the lights, people, anything. This guy is driving like a goddamn maniac, with music blasting, so it was a bit distracting. My brother finally asks them where we're going. They say we're heading up to a liquor store real quick, and they'll drop us back off, but it seems like we're in the middle of nowhere. Finally realizing the situation we're in, we open the doors while we're at a stoplight and run to the only thing we see, a gas station. We flag down a cab that drove by a few minutes later. After we told him what happened, he calmly tells us, "There is no liquor store over here." It was the worst and best feeling ever. We narrowly escaped God knows what, and stayed silent for the rest of the night. When I was young enough to still be in a crib, my room and my parents' room were mirror images separated by a wall. When I got older, I moved upstairs, and the wall was knocked down to make a true master bedroom. My dress clothes were stored in the closet that had been my room. For some reason, every time I used to go in there looking for something, my heart would start racing, and I would get really scared for no reason and run out of there as quickly as I could. When I tried to think and figure out what made me feel this way, I would get this image of my head being in the dark, staring at the closet, and fire dancing around the room. One time, my mother noticed how anxious I was coming out of her room and asked me what was wrong. When I told her, the color ran from her face, and she asked me, "You remember?" I didn't know what she was talking about, so she explained. While I was still in the crib, I used to wake my parents crying just about every night, telling them that there was a man in the closet and he wanted us to leave. After this had been going on for weeks and weeks, she started asking me questions about him. When she asked me who the man was, I told her, Bill. That freaked her the fuck out. Before we moved in, the house had belonged to her great Uncle Bill. When he was elderly, he had a live-in assistant, who it turns out was actually a burglar who was robbing the houses in the neighborhood. I guess Bill started to figure it out, because eventually the guy tied him to the bed, robbed the house, and set the house on fire before running out. He eventually got caught, but Bill burned to death. After learning the name, my mom said she basically said out loud, Uncle Bill, it's me. We live here now. This is my son, and you're scaring him. We're going to take good care of your house, so please leave us be. After that, I slept through the night with no problem, and that was the last we heard of the man in the closet. What is your scariest memory? Have you had nightmares about something so often you could swear it's your mind trying to piece something together? If you would like to share your scariest moments or memories, contact me through any of my social media links or leave a comment here. See you next time.